You ready? Chapter 22, Rumble and Great Speed. My goodness, are they going to catch him? Are the guys with the three red fezzes going to catch him? Come on, shouted Ada, giving chase. Mary followed. As the girls came out of the front door, they saw the thief leap onto a carriage and roughly shove the coachman into the street. With a snap of their reins, he dashed away in the stolen vehicle. Mary's eyes widened in amazement, and she wandered into the road, watching the carriage disappear. Suddenly, her arm was seized, and she was yanked back to the steps of Verdigris Manor just in time. The rumble and great speed of the crushing omnibus was upon the girls, and Mary was shocked to find Ada clutching her arm. Perfect timing! Come on! Ada shouted once more. She ran onto the back of the omnibus as fast as her once cherry velvet gown would allow and leapt to the ladder on the back. Mary, close on her heels, also jumped on the ladder, almost missing the last step. Hand over here, then the girls climbed to the roof of the hurtling bus to see a row of benches and an assortment of men, astonished at the sight of two young girls climbing onto the roof of the hurtling bus. As carefully as they could, Ada and Mary made their way forward, gripping the backs of the pitching benches, whipped mercilessly by the wind and the patter of new rain. I see him! Exclaimed Mary, pointing to the carriage ahead. He's heading for the docks. I know, said Ada, although the wind made it impossible for Mary to hear. She tugged the back of Mary's dress to get her to turn around and pointed behind them. Following the omnibus was another carriage, and out of the windows hung three men clutching red fezzes. Oh no, cried Mary, we're being followed. Where does this bus go? To the docks, answered Ada. Hold on. This is fantastic. There we go. Maybe get a little closer. Both girls grabbed the wet iron railing as the galloping bus turned a tight corner and the deck bucked, tossing them about like dolls. Ancient London house fronts and warehouses fled by in a stony blur. Mary could see the horses that were pulling Abernathy's carriage rear up and come to a stop. It seemed as though the bus were going to crash into the carriage, but the driver pulled his team of three horses up, and the girls rocked forward, scrambling along the rain-wet deck. To the rear, they found the ladder and shakily made their way down to the broad planks of the London docks. Tickets, please, said the bus driver, but the girls ignored him in their haste to see where Abernathy was going. As they made their way around to the front of the bus, there stood Charles with two members of the constabulary, never gonna get it, who were clapping the thief into handcuffs. Well done, Charles, shouted Ada. Charles, asked Mary, how did you know to be here? Got an envelope, I did, answered Charles, from Lady Ada. Said to wait here with the constabulary, arrest the fishmonger disguised as a gentleman driving a stolen carriage, and wait for the two of you to arrive by an omnibus. Ada, said Mary, who was once again astonished, you planned this all along? I knew he'd make a run for it, and because he's a sailor, I knew he'd try to find a boat, Ada explained. Because he's a criminal, I knew he'd steal the fastest way out, and that was the carriage. And I knew where the bus went and when it passed Verdigris Manor. They published the route and schedule in the newspaper. You set a trap? Asked Mary. I set a trap. Good heavens, that was terribly clever of you. I know, Ada replied. Thank you. Mary smiled and nodded. Just then a racket rose up behind the parked omnibus. Another carriage arrived, and out of it scrambled the three men in red fezzes. They quickly composed themselves and marched purposefully toward the constables, the thief, Charles, and the Wollstonecraft girls. Mary felt her pulse racing in her throat, unsure of what to do next. Aye, Axamla, said Ada calmly to the three men in red fezzes. Aye, Axamla, said the men in unison, tipping their hats with a choreographed bow. I believe you're looking for this, said Ada, leaning forward and plucking something from the breast pocket of Abernathy's waistcoat. Turning, she opened her hand to reveal a beautiful acorn pendant, which seemed to glow slightly in her palm, even in the gray light of afternoon. That's mine, yelled the thief, reaching for the jewel with his shackled hands. Ada noticed a flash of something on his forearm, a tattoo or letters. She still couldn't make them out, but this was clearly the same man who had been in her kitchen. The constables, who were waiting for a wagon to haul away their prisoner, gave him a yank on his collar, and that seemed to shut him up. Ada carefully handed the jewels to one of the men in red fezes, and he bowed graciously. "Coxecho edrem," he said. "Besetida," replied Ada with a curtsy. By the way, I have no idea what I'm reading there. I hope I'm not making too much of a mess of it. "What's all that?" asked Mary. "Turkish. I learned it last night." "You learned to speak Turkish last night?" "Well, I learned to read it. I've only spoken it just now." "You are quite astonishing, Lady Ada," said Mary to her friend. "And full of tigers." Ada smiled and took Mary's hands, giving them a squeeze. "Those gentlemen are the rightful owners of the Acorn of Ankara. I noticed outside the prison that one of them was wearing a medal. I looked it up, and it's a diplomatic award from the Ottoman Empire, Turkey. Abernathy knew they were watching. That's why he didn't run away before now. But when they found him out, he didn't have much choice." One of the befezed gentlemen produced a velvet case. Inside was a bed of silk, and the Acorn of Ankara fit perfectly into the small hollow. When the case snapped closed, the three gentlemen smiled and tipped their hats to the Wollstonecraft girls. And there it is, back in its proper case. "I beg your pardon," said the bus driver, approaching the gathering. "Tickets, please." Mary and Ada looked at one another. "I'm afraid I don't have any money with me," said Mary. "Me either," said Ada, checking her bag but finding only Haversham's book. "I guess I didn't think of everything." "Perhaps I can be of assistance," said Peeves, out of breath. With no more coaches to hire or steal, and having missed the bus, he had run several blocks before finding a cart that took him much of the way, and then he ran the rest, huffing and puffing. He paid the bus driver, who gave a nod and returned to the monstrosity. "Oh," said Mary, "what of poor Rosie?" "Charles?" asked Ada with a raised eyebrow. "Handed it to the magistrate myself, Lady Ada," Charles replied. "When he read the letter that was from a Lady Byron, he tugged his forelock and gave the release order as quick as you please. There you go. I presented all the evidence to the magistrate in a letter which Charles delivered earlier. Rosie will be on her way home to Verdigris Manor as we speak." "And did you mention in your letter to the magistrate that you are an 11-year-old girl?" asked Mary. "I didn't think to bring it up. It hardly seemed relevant to the case." "But Ada, this is brilliant," said Mary. "You've solved the case." "We solved it together," said Ada. "If you hadn't pointed out that rich people don't talk about how rich they are, I never would have suspected that Abernathy wasn't really rich, or really Abernathy. And I couldn't have gotten to the prison or to see Rosie without you. So I never would have known that Rosie saw Beau take the acorn, and you and Charles found out about the uncanny influence of mesmerism." "Together, then," said Mary, giving Ada a serious nod. "But still, I'd imagined you swooping down in your balloon with a contraption of some sort, solving all of this with science." "But this is science," assured Ada. "Wondering, guessing, trying, looking at all things, sorting variables, guessing again. That's how we did it. Science." "I say," interrupted Peeves, "Miss Cumberland and Mr. Franklin have returned to the Byron house. I suggest we do likewise." "Agreed," said Ada. "Oh, and Peeves." "Yes, Lady Ada." "You are remissed, or missed, whatever the opposite of dismissed is." "Hired, I believe," said Peeves. "Hired, then," declared Ada, "as my tutor so long as Mary can stay. Mother is away until after Christmas, and when she returns she may throw you out herself if she likes. But until such time, do please consider yourself our tutor." "I should like that very much," answered Peeves. "Here, you can start with this." From her bag she pulled the green book with the gold acorn on the cover. "And this," the handcuffed Abernathy let out a frustrated howl. "There it is! I knew that stupid book would be the problem. I looked all over." But the constables had given him another sharp shake and started hustling him away along the docks. Ada nodded, suspicions confirmed. She turned to Mary, put a finger to the side of her nose, and said, "Sissy." Then she turned back to Peeves to finish the question. What does this mean? De parvis grandis acervus erit. It's Latin, said Peeves. From small things, great things will come. We have an English expression, from little acorns, mighty oaks grow. Same meaning. Huh, was all Ada said. Charles? Charles nodded to Ada. It's good to have you here officially, she concluded. Thank you, Lady Ada, for a bit of excitement. It's back to the boot polish factory for me. Charles executed a small bow and headed back to work. The girls smiled and thanked him, and hand in hand followed Peeves to find a carriage for hire. Who the dickens was that boy? Asked Peeves. And then everything went horribly wrong. Chapter 23. A huge chuff sent a shot of black smoke up from the water as a round-bellied steamboat chugged to life. The two constables turned toward the distraction. Abernathy, still in irons, used the cuffs to strike the first constable on the head, knocking him down, and then sharply shouldered the second constable into the river with a resounding sploosh. Peeves turned at the commotion to see the thief leap aboard the little tugboat, scramble to the wheel, and overpower the captain, tossing him overboard with the constable. Mary and Ada watched, mouths agape, as Peeves ran to the dock's edge, but Abernathy had gained control of the boat and was picking up speed. He's getting away! Peeves stood frozen and frustrated. Mary watched the pistons rise and fall on the steam engine, heard the shuttle valve slam back and forth in rhythm, and all the pipes and tubes reminded her of... A carriage! Cried Mary with a plan. Quickly! Peeves turned to her puzzled. Trust me, implored Mary, and Peeves put 2 fingers to his lips and let out the most piercing whistle the girls had ever heard. A carriage appeared by magic, as if by magic. As fast and as dangerous as the omnibus had seemed, it was nothing compared to the banging flight of the carriage. They could hear the snap of the reins and the thundering of hooves on cobbles, and the whole thing amounted to a deafening roar of speed. Have you any more money with you? Shouted Mary over the racket. Ada's hands were bone white in Mary's. Yes, why? Asked Peeves. Because I promised him £1 if he'd get us back quick. £1? Said Peeves, horrified. You did say alive, didn't you? Asked Ada. A large stone beneath the carriage wheel sent the coach skyward, rattling the girls and Peeves like dice in a cup. Moments later, bones shaken, they arrived in front of the Byron house. Fortunately, Peeves did indeed have an entire £1 with him, and he handed it over to the grinning coachman as the girls practically fled up the stairs, across the street, and up the stairs, Mary dragging Ada by the wrist like a doll through the front door. Peeves ran in after them and saw them both run halfway up the hallway, then turned back, brushing past him to the downstairs kitchen. Fish knife! Yelled Mary down the hall. Peeves stepped back, and Mary and Ada once again whipped past the banister and up the stairs, this time with the wicked sharp curved blade in Mary's hands. Wrench! Shouted Mary. Ada tore to her room and, after a few heartbeats of hurried rummaging, emerged with a giant wrench from under her bed. Balloon! Was the last cry needed to spur Peeves into action, and he took the stairs 3 at a time to catch up with the girls. Peeves' wet shoes slid on the attic floorboards, a spatter of mud from the girls' boots having already laid a path to the window. This had been closed by Mr. Franklin, and the sill was slightly swollen from the rain. Mary tugged to get it open, but it was of no use. Allow me, said Peeves, who put both hands under the small half-moon of brass at the bottom and hauled with both his shoulders. The window started up a bit, but held fast. Thinking quickly, Ada plucked the fish knife from Mary's hands and thrust it into the gap between the window and the sill. Using it as a lever, she pushed down with all her might, Mary joining in as Peeves continued to pull up. After a moment of grunting and puffing, they had it open, and Ada was the first one over the sill and onto the windy roof, rope firmly in hand, squinting against the rain. The others followed. Ada, get in! And work those ropes there. I'll untie the ones down here, shouted Mary against the wind. And Peeves, use the wrench to loosen those bolts. We need to get off the roof. No, yelled Peeves, trying to be heard above the howling of the storm and creaking of the great ropes. It's too dangerous. Let me go alone. My balloon, my rules, said Ada with a grin. My goodness, this is a long chapter. I'm wondering where we should stop it. We'll go a little bit further. I'm too excited. And with that, she disappeared into the wicker basket. A moment later, a small side table was tossed out the top hatch, bouncing perilously off the roof and tumbling it into the street below. 2 chairs followed. Now there's room for you, she shouted in triumph. Peeves worked on the bolted struts that connected the balloon to the various chimneys. It was this tangle of pipes and funnels that had reminded Mary of the balloon when she saw the engine of the steamboat. After a few squeaks and grindings, all that connected the balloon to the roof was a single rope, and as Peeves clambered aboard, Ada sliced it nearly with the fish knife. Mary had imagined that they'd soar to the sky, but the weight of the 3 of them merely dropped the whole thing with a thud to the roof, where it went sliding down the black tiles like the sled on a slippery slope, a slope with a cliff at the end. Peeves didn't fit completely in the basket, so his head poked out the basket, or the balloon, poked out of as the balloon and basket went over the edge of the house. Mercifully, a gust of wind swept them up and over the roof of the neighbors, the gondola catching and cracking the clay of their chimney. They headed south with the wind. Go on, shouted Mary to Ada. Go on where? Asked Ada. Drive, steer us to the river. It's not made for steering, just for staying put, yelled Ada over the wind. Mary blinked at her. She said, and then, well? But the wind was pushing them south toward the river, which is where they wanted to go. At least Peeves thought that was what they wanted. What's the plan? He asked Mary. To be honest, I've only got as far as this, she admitted. Will this float? Asked Peeves. Ada looked down through the sliding piles of books and rolls of paper at the wicker at her feet and at the gaps between the wicker weave. She tried not to look too carefully as the glimpse of the ground flew past at a dizzying rate. All right. Let's keep going. I doubt it, said Ada. I can see the docks, cried Mary. Indeed, they were fast approaching the warehouse that lined the boardwalk along the river. There, Ada pointed at the black pillar of soot that trudged along the Thames. Beneath that was a round-bellied steamboat with the escaping thief. They all looked out, and this had to be They all leaned out, and this had the happy effect of guiding the balloon in the steamboat's direction. However, the balloon was descending quickly and too sharply to clear the warehouse. At this rate, they were going to crash into a brick building. I have a plan, said Peeves, although he wasn't entirely convinced he did. He grabbed a stout rope dangling from the balloon's inner ring and pulled himself up out of the gondola, his shoes on the top of the wicker deck. What are you doing? Asked Mary. He's giving us some altitude, said Ada approvingly. The 3 of them paused, taking in what Peeves was venturing to do. But the only other weight in the balloon belonged to the books, and clearly they could not be sacrificed, so the matter was settled wordlessly with a shared shrug. If you'd be so kind as to calculate the timing, Lady Ada, said Peeves. In her imagination, Ada turned the whole thing into a diagram, the balloon with its altitude and weight as variables, the rate and the angle of its descent and the proximity to the warehouse, Thames, and the target, the speed of the sailboat and the force of the wind. Simple enough. Ready, said Ada, counting under her breath. Now! Peeves pushed off from the gondola, swinging on the rope like a pirate boarding a ship. With perfect timing, he stepped crisply onto the roof of the warehouse closest to the river and let go of the rope with a smart salute to the Wollstonecraft girls. Without Peeves's weight, the balloon shot up into the sky before steadying and beginning to descend again, although more slowly this time. That was brilliant, cried Mary. Now what? It's your plan, remember? Said Ada. Look at that. Peeves is being quite helpful, isn't he? They were closing in on the escaping steamboat. The wind was pushing them southwest, but gravity was pulling them to the froth of the water and the steamboat's wake. The closer they got to the water, the faster they seemed to go, until they were practically right on top of the boat. Mary was sure they were going to crash and grabbed a rope in Ada's hand. She did indeed feel a lurch, but one upward, not down. The soot and steam from the fleeting boat's engine pushed hot air into the balloon, so they hopped up and ahead of the boat, coming down again, and even more force and violence. Hold on, shouted Ada, watching the gaps between the wicker. The boat's bow came into view, right in front of the toe of her boot. The thief could not possibly have been prepared for being bashed in the head with a giant wicker basket, inhabited by two remarkably clever and resourceful girls. So he wasn't. The gondola clocked him at a decent enough speed so as to knock him out cold before it crashed into the engine, tipping the girls over sideways and spilling them onto the deck of the steamboat. Sparks and soot flew, and despite the rain, the balloon's tattered fabric soon was in flames. Help me, shouted Ada, scrambling to her feet on the slippery deck. She began pushing the basket to the deck's short railings. If the fire spreads, the whole boat will go up. Ada cracked open an unsettlingly fragile basket bottom, and the pile of books spilled out like fish from a net. By now, the wicker itself was alight. Mary rallied herself and came alongside Ada, rolling the basket, fiery balloon and all, up and over the rail, overboard into the quenching Thames. The fire was quickly out, and the basket bobbed a bit as it took on water and soggily sank. Mary watched Ada go to the basket without expression. Mary watched Ada watch the basket go without expression. I'm sorry, Ada, said Mary. She reached out and hugged Ada tightly to comfort her, although tears were trickling down her own cheeks. Ada was totally, utterly silent for a minute, there in the wind and rain and puff and thump of the engine. We need a bigger one anyway, said Ada at last, and a way to steer. And she looked admiringly at the steam engine. One of these. Speaking of steering, said Mary, wiping her tears away with a smile, do you know how to pilot a steamboat? Wow. That's all I can say is wow. Good for them. All right, we're going to probably finish tomorrow. But right here, I'm going to stop. I love you.